My name is Kara Young, and I am here on behalf of the Berkeley Food Institute to welcome you all here. Gosh, it's good to see you all. When we talked about when exactly we were going to hold this gathering, we anticipated that it might be a good idea to do it after the election, because we thought that it would be good for us to have a space just in case, to gather and to talk, and to be together to nourish one another and to nourish ourselves. But I don't know if any of us really anticipated what it would feel like, what this last week would feel like. So I am so thankful to see you all in this room today to talk about such incredibly important issues, and also to eat together, because I think that that is where the revolution happens, right? When we're eating and nourishing ourselves and one another. So just a couple of pieces of logistical information. There is a bathroom here, and there's a bathroom way in the back down that hallway. There's food in the back, including coffee, tea, and water. And I also want to turn your attention to the program. And if you turn to the back of the program, you'll see a list of the collaborators who we have been working with so closely through the entire process of putting this together. And we are so excited to have been able to do this so collaboratively. And so without further ado, I want to introduce Judy Juanita. And she is the keynote speaker for us today. She is a novelist, poet, and playwright, and a former Black Panther. You can find her full bio in the program. So let's welcome up to the stage Judy Juanita. Thank you.
Thank you, and it's good to see everyone come out on such a rainy day, which we're spoiled in California in this part of California without much. Okay, I want you to follow these threads, hopefully, of food hunger, or what we've come to call food insecurity, the government, and charitable giving. In 1968, Father Earl Neal of the St. Augustine's Church and Ruth Beckford Smith, who is like our Catherine Dunham here, our great dancer and our great dance professor, they began planning the Free Breakfast for School Children program. They did the necessary research. They consulted with nutritionists to determine what a healthy breakfast menu should include. They had the church parish hall and kitchen inspected by the health department and the fire marshal to certify that it met the necessary health and safety codes. And so began the first nationally organized breakfast program in the United States, either in the public or private sector. What was the purpose of this program begun by the Black Panther Party? Huey Newton said in To Die for the People, all these programs satisfy the deep needs of the community, but they are not solutions to our problems. They're survival programs, meaning survival pending revolution. So the survival programs, he said, are not answers or solutions, but they will help us to organize the community around a true analysis and understanding of their situation. When consciousness and understanding is raised to a high level, then the community will seize the time and deliver themselves from the boot of their oppressors. By the end of 1969, the Black Panthers were serving full, free breakfasts, including milk, bacon, eggs, grits, and toast, to 20,000 school-aged children in 19 cities around the country and in 23 local affiliates every school day. The funding for the program came from within the communities being served, from local stores, churches, and groceries. Bobby Seale, a founder of the Black Panther Party, said then, there are millions of people who are living below subsistence, welfare mothers, poor white people, Mexican Americans, Chicano peoples, Latinos, and Black people. In 1987, Oral Lee Brown, a realtor here in Oakland, said this about her time in 1987. I adopted my first class of students to support in going to college from Brookfield Elementary School in 1987, after seeing a small child struggling through family hunger. It's humane. It's natural to want to help someone who you see suffering without food. It's humane, it's humanistic to help malnourished children. Okay? Oral Lee Brown was not considered a terrorist or a militant or a threat to bring down the United States government. But the Panthers' image and focus on self-determination drew the attention of then FBI Director Edgar Hoover. He singled out the Black Panthers as a national hate group and the breakfast program as an act of subversion. No good deed goes unpunished, okay? Hoover declared all-out war on the Black Panthers. In May of 1969, he sent a memo to all FBI offices that read, "The Breakfast for Children program promotes at least tacit support for the Black Panther Party among naive individuals, and what is more distressing, it provides the Black Panther Party with a ready audience composed of highly impressionable youths. Consequently, the Breakfast for Children program represents the best and most influential activity going for the Black Panther Party, and as such, is potentially the greatest threat to efforts by authorities to neutralize the Black Panther Party and destroy what it stands for." So let us look a little bit at the historical struggle that has gone on in the United States with food in North America. Remember that the British colonists attempting to settle in North America during the 16th and early 17th century often faced severe hunger. Compared with South America, readily available food could be hard to come by. Many settlers starved to death. Other settlers were saved after being supplied with food by Native Americans, with the intercession of Pocahontas being a notable example. It didn't take long, however, for the colonists to adapt to conditions in the New World and to realize that North America was extremely fertile. So social and economic conditions changed substantially in the 1800s, the early 19th century, especially with the market reforms of the 1830s. While overall prosperity increased, the productive land became harder to come by and was often only available for those who could afford substantial rates. Substantial rates. Today we would call that mortgages, high rents, 20% down payments, all cash buyers, okay, familiar to any of us, okay. It became more difficult then to make a living either from public lands or even a small farm without the capital to buy the new technology, up-to-date technology. Sometimes small farmers were forced off their lands and became homeless. American society responded by opening up almshouses, houses for the poor, for charity, for old people, the sick. But even so, by 1850, the life expectancy in the United States had dropped to 43 years, about the same as what prevailed in Western Europe. So the number of hungry and homeless people in the United States increased in the 1870s due to industrialization. Okay, So let's look a little bit then at another development that's going on in the White House. Okay? Adrian Miller, the food writer and historian, has written about the contribution of Black chefs to the political life of the United States. Miller says that throughout our nation's history, African American cooks have been prized for their culinary skills as restaurateurs, chefs, caterers, private family cooks, hired out cooks and street vendors, to name a few. By the late 1800s, many American gourmands boasted that the culinary talent of African American cooks rivaled, if not excelled, those of French chefs. And soul food, he reminds us, is not the total sum of African American cooking. African American cooks, sometimes by choice, but mostly by force, prepared a variety of foods for themselves and others. For example, wealthy families often had their enslaved cooks apprentice under French chefs in order to prepare the best French dishes. French, Italian, kosher foods, you name it, African American cooks have made it. And African American cooking can be healthy. For centuries, African American cuisines were mainly based on a wide variety of vegetables and seafood, as they had been in West Africa. It's only in the last 100 years that African Americans moved to the cities and soul food went bad. Okay? African Americans became more prosperous and could afford, like other immigrants, more meat, fatty foods, and sweets. Thus, foods that were for special occasions in the rural South became more commonplace in the city. However, city life was more sedentary, and over time, the health problems increased: diabetes, high blood pressure, obesity. However, Miller describes two kinds of cooking that go on in the White House historically. Haute cuisine, entertaining diplomats and wealthy members of the public, for which the president would often retain a European chef or an African American caterer to do such meals. Then there was the way that the presidents ate in private, comfort food. So many Southerners were presidents that meant a lot of African Americans in the White House kitchen. Some were free, but most were enslaved. Enslaved cooks who were brought from their master's plantation, the master being the President of the United States. There are many historical references where presidents said they preferred the comfort food to the fancy meals. So all of this is going on, and then we have the great migration of Black people from the South, the beautiful rural South, with its treacherous KKK, the end of radical Reconstruction, and their movement to the North, the urban North and West. That was going on between 1870, 1920, okay? And then after that came the Great Depression of the 1930s, okay? So food hunger had been decreasing, and then it increased with the Great Depression. So here again, we see the charitable giving coming out with the soup kitchens and the bread lines in the 1930s. So my parents are Southerners. They're from Oklahoma, and they met at what's the school? Langston University in Oklahoma, and they both had college educations. However, my dad had a gambling habit, so there was a great struggle with money in my childhood. However, we always had food. It wasn't always the food that I liked. As the oldest daughter, I had the task of cooking the beans when I got home from school. The beans I burned while I was either reading or playing outside. Once I left home, I vowed never to eat beans again. Then I became a radical right here in the Bay Area, joined the Black Panther Party while I was a student at San Francisco State, and became an activist full-blown. I went to a Dick Gregory lecture in 1970. Dick Gregory is a famous comedian who became a food activist. Okay? Yes, yeah, great guy, great man. At that lecture, he predicted a famine in the land, and he insisted that we all go out and buy 100 pounds of navy beans, which the rats wouldn't eat, to stave off hunger in the coming years of starvation. So, being the pure young person that I was, I went out and bought 100 pounds of navy beans. Okay, there never was a famine, okay? However, I learned to cook a mean-ass bean soup while I was a fellow traveler with the Nation of Islam in New Jersey. And then when I went through an equally mean-ass divorce, I learned the value of beans. I relearned the value of beans, of indigenous food, you know? It took me perhaps 25 years to use up those beans. My son, when he was about 11, came to me one time and said, "Mommy, I'm so tired of beans. Bean soup, bean pie, bean everything," you know? So, let me come back to our nemesis, J. Edgar Hoover. Once Hoover went after the breakfast program, the handwriting was on the wall. Even though the organizers were careful to consult with nutritionists to make sure the children got high-quality balanced meals, make sure they had the necessary permits, they became regular targets of local officials. The children they served were caught in the middle. After the Black Panther Party and its programs were summarily dismantled, the Breakfast for Children program, however, found new life and a new champion in the federal government. While President Harry Truman established the National School Lunch Act in 1946 to offer free or reduced cost lunches at school, it wasn't until 1975 that the government formally added the school breakfast program to its offerings. These programs, however, also had the stigma, okay, of being for the poor kids. Okay? And kind of like the cheese line for government cheese, okay, kids wouldn't stand, and some kids wouldn't stand in the line to get the free breakfast programs. And so they found that basically 37% of students were participating in these programs. However, by the early 1980s, President Ronald Reagan's administration scaled back welfare provisions, leading to a rapid rise in activity from grassroots hunger relief agencies. So here we come up, I'm bringing us up now, okay? In comparison to other advanced economies, the US had high levels of hunger even during the first few years of the 21st century, due in part to greater inequality and relatively less spending on welfare. Hunger in the United States was made worse by the lasting global inflation in the price of food that began in late 2006 and by the financial crisis of 2008. By 2012, approximately 1 in 6 Americans, or 50 million Americans, were food insecure, and 1 in 4 children. Okay. Again, an anecdote. Even though we are having more and more of an emphasis right now on African American cuisine, partly, in fact, due to a number of restaurants opening, and the fact that we had a Black president in the Oval Office, culinary schools tend to be highly Eurocentric. So chefs who decide to explore the food of the African diaspora are often self-driven. One, Mr. Small, said, you have to ask yourself, where does this come from? Where does this food come from? You have to walk backward through some slave markets and an ocean or two. You have to follow the African trail. Okay? And in a book called High on the Hog, its author explores the countless ways in which what's commonly known as American food can follow its lineage to Africa and the slaves who did much of the cooking in the New World. African cooking, African food in many ways belongs to African Americans. American food in many ways belongs to African Americans because we were the stewards and caretakers of the whole enterprise for so long. So I'll now end with this anecdote. So I've bragged on my Grandma Jewel's gumbo to friends and different people for years. Bless her soul, she's gone now. So my friend Kate, this is when I lived in New York, said, oh, I'm gonna treat you to Paul Prudhomme's new restaurant in Manhattan. And if you don't like it, I will, she'd give me a certain amount of money. I don't remember how much it was. I said, okay, I'm game. So we went, stood in the long lines, sat down. He's famous for his blackened catfish at that time. They brought out a bowl of gumbo. It was watery. It tasted like it was made with Campbell's tomato soup. It was served up with no filet and no rice. And the cornbread was as dry as dust. Okay? We have a lot of work to do, a lot of reclaiming to do. We don't quite know yet what's going to happen with this new administration. However, we're getting signs that we're in for a battle. The Panthers were never called humane. They're never called food activists, never called cultural workers. But that's what we were.